My father told me I was no longer part of the family on a Tuesday evening in November. The snow had just begun to fall in Omaha, thick flakes drifting past the kitchen window like ashes from something burning far away. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so peaceful while everything inside our house was shattering. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration that my parents had reluctantly paid for, though they reminded me constantly that Brandon's education at the University of British Columbia had cost twice as much. Brandon was the golden child. Brandon was the future. Brandon was everything I would never be. That evening started like any other. Mom had made pot roast the way she always did on Tuesdays. Dad sat at the head of the table, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, checking the stock market reports on his phone, the way he did every evening before dinner. Brandon was visiting from Vancouver, where he had been living for the past 3 years, supposedly building some kind of marketing empire that our parents had invested their retirement savings into. I should have noticed the tension earlier, the way Mom kept glancing at Dad, the way Brandon avoided eye contact with me, the way the silence felt heavier than usual, pressing down on all of us like a physical weight. Dad cleared his throat. He set his phone down on the table screen facing down and folded his hands in front of him. It was the same posture he used when he was about to deliver bad news at the insurance company where he worked as a regional manager. Professional, detached, final. "Your mother and I have made a decision," he said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "We are moving to Vancouver to be closer to Brandon. He needs our support right now. His company is going through a critical growth phase." I nodded, not understanding yet. "Okay," I said. "When are you thinking of moving?" The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Brandon shifted in his seat. Mom stared at her plate, pushing a piece of carrot around with her fork. "We leave in 2 weeks," Dad said. "And Harper, when we come back to visit, we expect you to have found your own place." The words hit me like a physical blow. I remained there trying to process what he was saying. My own place. As in not here. As in not welcome in the home where I had grown up, where my childhood drawings were still stuck to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like fruit. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. Some part of me had always known this moment would come. The favoritism had been building for years, small exclusions that added up to something much larger. When Brandon graduated from college, they threw him a party and handed him the keys to a new car. When I graduated, I got a card with $50 in it. That pattern repeated itself in countless ways year after year until the message was clear. I got nothing. Dad leaned forward, and for a moment I thought he might soften. I thought he might explain that this was temporary, that they would help me get on my feet, that they still loved me, even if they were choosing to be closer to my brother. Instead, he said the words that would echo in my mind for the next 8 years. "You need to understand something, Harper. Your brother has potential. He is building something real. You, on the other hand, have no direction. You have spent the last 4 years getting a degree that means nothing, while Brandon was out there making connections, building a future. We cannot keep carrying you forever. When we get back from Canada, don't be home. Don't be home." 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Final. I looked at my mother, desperate for her to intervene, to say something, anything. She had always been the quieter parent, the one who deferred to Dad on every major decision. But surely this was different. Surely she would not let him throw their only daughter out of the house with 2 weeks' notice and nothing but a worthless degree and a few $100s in savings. Mom met my eyes for just a second before looking away. "Your father knows best," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she did not take it back. Brandon said nothing at all. He just remained there eating his pot roast as if we were discussing the weather instead of my entire life falling apart. I do not remember finishing dinner. I do not remember going upstairs to my room. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my bed, staring at the wall covered with photos from high school and college, all these snapshots of a life that apparently meant nothing to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of packing boxes and awkward silences. I found a room to rent in a house in Denver, a city I had never been to, but which offered cheaper rent than Omaha and the chance to start over somewhere no one knew my name or my family's opinion of me. The night before they left for Vancouver, I stood in my empty bedroom, looking at the bare walls and the stripped mattress. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. 22 years of life reduced to what I could carry. Dad found me there. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I thought for a moment that he might apologize, that he might say he had been too harsh, that he had not meant it the way it sounded. Instead, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $500. "This should help you get started," he said. "Consider it a graduation gift." A graduation gift, 2 years later. As if $500 could make up for everything. I took the check because I needed the money. I took it because I had no other choice. But I did not thank him for it. The next morning, I watched from my rental car as my parents loaded their belongings into a moving truck. Brandon was already back in Vancouver preparing for their arrival. No one came to say goodbye to me. No one hugged me or wished me well. No one even looked in my direction. I drove away from Omaha as the snow began to fall again. In the rearview mirror, I watched my childhood home grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. I did not know then that 8 years would pass before I saw any of them again. I did not know that the next time my father contacted me, it would be because my face was on television, because Forbes had named me one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in America. I did not know that the family who had thrown me away would one day want me back. But sitting in that rental car watching the snow blur the highway ahead of me, I made myself a promise. I would become someone. I would build a life so remarkable that they would have to acknowledge me. I would prove that their golden child was not the only Lewis capable of success. And if they ever came crawling back asking for the daughter they had discarded like last season's fashion, I would be ready. I would be ready. Denver welcomed me with gray skies and a furnished room, in a house that smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. My landlord was a woman named Doris, who collected ceramic cats and asked no questions about why a 22-year-old girl had shown up at her door with 2 suitcases and eyes red from crying. The room was small, a twin bed with a mattress that sagged in the middle, a dresser with a missing drawer handle, a window that looked out onto a parking lot. The rent was $400 a month, which left me exactly $100 from my father's graduation gift after the first month's deposit. I found work within a week, though, not the kind of work my business degree had prepared me for. In the mornings, I waited tables at a diner called Rosie's on Colfax Avenue, serving coffee and eggs to construction workers and early bird seniors who tipped in quarters. Afternoons, I drove for DoorDash, delivering Thai food and pizza to people who never looked me in the eye. Evenings, I worked the phones at a call center, reading scripts about extended car warranties to people who hung up on me before I finished my first sentence. 3 jobs, 60 hours a week minimum, and still I was barely scraping by. The first few months were the hardest. I would come home from my shift at the call center, my voice hoarse from talking, my feet aching from standing all day at the diner, and I would sit on that sagging mattress and wonder if my father had been right. Maybe I had no direction. Maybe I was destined to be nothing more than a waitress, a delivery driver, a voice on the phone that people hung up on. I missed my family in ways I had not expected. Not the family that had thrown me away, but the family I had thought I had. The family that took vacations together and celebrated birthdays and gathered around the Christmas tree to open presents. The family that existed only in my memories and maybe had never existed at all. I did not call them. They did not call me. The silence between us grew wider every day, a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. Winter turned to spring and spring to summer. I learned to navigate Denver's public transportation system, to stretch a box of pasta into 3 meals, to smile at customers, even when they treated me like I was invisible. I learned to live alone, to be alone, to find comfort in my own company, because there was no one else. The other women at Rosie's were kind to me. There was Maria, a grandmother who had been waitressing for 30 years and knew how to handle difficult customers with a smile that never reached her eyes. There was Jasmine, a single mother working doubles to support her 2 kids. There was old Linda, who claimed she had once been a backup singer for a famous country band, and who taught me that the key to good tips was remembering regulars' orders before they even sat down. They did not ask about my family. In Denver, it seemed everyone was running from something. We were all reinventing ourselves, shedding old skins and growing new ones. One afternoon in late July, I was delivering an order to an apartment complex on the west side when my car broke down. The engine made a terrible grinding noise, metal scraping against metal, and then there was smoke, and then there was nothing. I stood on the side of the road in 90-degree heat, watching my only means of income fail in front of me. The repair estimate was $800. I had $200 in my savings account. I sat in Doris's kitchen that night, eating ramen noodles and calculating my options. I could ask my parents for help. The thought made me physically nauseous. I could take out a loan, but my credit score was barely existent. I could sell something, but I owned nothing of value. Or I could find a way to make more money. The idea came to me slowly over the next few weeks. I had a business degree that I was not using. I had spent 4 years learning about markets and strategy and entrepreneurship. I had watched Brandon talk about his marketing company at countless family dinners, absorbing his vocabulary, even as I pretended not to care. What if I could build something of my own? It started as just a thought, a fantasy I entertained while wiping down tables at Rosie's or waiting for the next DoorDash order to come through. But the thought kept growing, taking shape, becoming more real every day. I started visiting the public library on my days off, using their computers to research small business ideas. I read articles about startups and entrepreneurship, about women who had built empires from nothing. I studied failure as much as success, trying to understand what separated the dreamers from the doers. I bought a used laptop from Craigslist for $50. The screen flickered sometimes, and it took forever to boot up, but it was mine. I started teaching myself to code using free online resources, staying up late into the night to complete tutorials and build simple projects. My landlord, Doris, found me asleep at the kitchen table one morning, my head resting on the laptop keyboard. She made me coffee and asked what I was working on. "I am trying to learn something new," I told her. "I am trying to figure out who I am supposed to be." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Good for you, honey," she said. Most people never bother to ask themselves that question. By the time fall arrived, I had fixed my car with money borrowed from Maria at Rosie's. I had moved from the moldy room in Doris's house to a slightly less moldy studio apartment closer to downtown. The exhaustion had not lifted, but something else had changed. Something had shifted inside me. I was no longer just waiting for my life to happen. I was building it one line of code at a time, one tutorial at a time, one sleepless night at a time. I did not know where this path would lead. I did not know that in a few years I would be standing on a stage accepting an award while cameras flashed and reporters shouted my name. All I knew was that I refused to be the nothing my father had said I was. I refused to disappear. The idea came to me at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday in October, almost 2 years after I had arrived in Denver. I was sitting at my kitchen table, which was really just a folding card table I had bought at a thrift store, working on a coding project for a class I was taking online. The apartment was cold because I kept the heat low to save money, and I was wrapped in a blanket that had holes in it, sipping tap water from a chipped mug. I was tired, the kind of tiredness that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel impossible. I had worked a double shift at Rosie's, followed by 4 hours at the call center, and I should have been asleep. But sleep felt like a luxury I could not afford, not when there was so much I needed to learn. My computer screen flickered, as it always did when I had been using it too long. I was building a simple budgeting application, a project for my online class, nothing revolutionary. But as I typed, I found myself thinking about all the women I had met over the past 2 years. Maria, who had worked the same job for 30 years and still lived paycheck to paycheck. Jasmine, who was raising 2 kids on a waitress salary and had no idea how to save for their education. My landlord, Doris, who collected ceramic cats because they were cheap and easy to buy, had small comforts in a life full of financial uncertainty. All of these women were smart. All of them worked hard. But none of them had ever been taught how to manage money. No one had ever sat them down and explained compound interest or retirement accounts or emergency funds. They lived in a constant state of financial anxiety, never quite sure if they would make rent, never able to plan for the future because the present was so overwhelming. What if there was a tool, I thought? What if there was an application designed specifically for women like them? Not a complicated financial platform full of jargon and assumptions about existing wealth. Something simple, something accessible, something that met women where they were and helped them get to where they wanted to be. I started writing notes on the back of a napkin. By the time the sun came up, I had filled 3 napkins and the margins of my textbook with ideas. An application that would analyze spending patterns and identify areas for savings. A system that would automatically move small amounts of money into savings accounts based on individual goals. Educational content delivered in bite-sized pieces, not overwhelming lectures. A community feature that would connect women in similar financial situations, providing support and accountability. I called it Solace, a place of comfort in financial chaos. The next few months were a blur of learning and building. I taught myself more advanced programming. I took free courses in user experience design. I watched hours of videos about startup development and venture capital and business models. I filled notebook after notebook with ideas and iterations, crossing things out and starting over, and refining my vision until it felt real enough to touch. I also made a friend. Her name was Mia Chen, and she worked at the coffee shop next to my apartment building. She was 34, originally from San Francisco, a former marketing executive who had burned out and moved to Denver for a fresh start. She had dark hair that she wore in a perpetual messy bun and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. We started talking when I came in for my usual morning coffee, still in my Rosie's uniform laptop bag, slung over my shoulder. She noticed the coding books I always carried and asked what I was working on. I am building an application, I told her, for women who have never been taught how to handle money. Her eyes lit up in a way I had not seen from anyone in a long time. Tell me more, she said. I told her everything. The idea, the vision, the countless hours I had spent learning and building. I told her about my family, about being thrown away, about the promise I had made to myself that cold November night. Mia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward and said something that changed everything. I want to help you build this. Mia had connections I did not have. She knew people in the tech industry, people who had experience with startups, people who might be willing to give advice to a waitress with a half-finished application and a dream. She also had skills I lacked: marketing, branding, networking, all the things that turned a good product into a successful business. We started meeting every evening after my shifts, working on Solace at the coffee shop until closing time. Mia helped me refine my pitch, identify my target market, think about monetization in ways I had never considered. She also became the first person in years who believed in me unconditionally. There were setbacks, countless setbacks. I had to rebuild the entire application twice when I discovered fundamental flaws in my original design. A potential mentor I had been counting on told me that financial apps for women were a niche market with limited growth potential. A man at a networking event asked me if my boyfriend had helped me with the technical parts. But I kept going. Mia kept going. We kept building, kept refining, kept believing that Solace could become something real. One night, about a year after I had first had the idea, Mia and I sat in the coffee shop after closing, surrounded by empty cups and scattered papers. We had just finished the first fully functional version of the application. It was far from perfect, full of bugs and missing features. But it worked. It actually worked. We did it, Mia said, her voice full of wonder. We actually did it. I looked at the application on my laptop screen, at this thing I had created from nothing but determination and desperation and the refusal to be what my father said I was. No, I said. We are just getting started. The next 3 years tested me in ways I had never imagined. Building Solace was like trying to construct a house during an earthquake, with the ground constantly shifting beneath my feet and everything threatening to collapse at any moment. Mia and I launched our beta version to a small group of users in the spring of 2019. The response was encouraging but complicated. Women loved the concept. They appreciated the simplicity, the community features, and the non-judgmental approach to financial education. But the application itself was buggy slow, prone to crashing at critical moments. Users signed up with enthusiasm and then drifted away when the experience failed to meet their expectations. I spent 18 months fixing problems, rewriting code, learning from mistakes that cost us users and credibility. Money was always a concern. I was still working at Rosie's, though I had cut back to part-time, surviving on tips and the small amount of savings I had managed to accumulate. Mia was doing freelance marketing work to pay her rent while dedicating her evenings and weekends to Solace. We applied to dozens of accelerator programs and were rejected from all of them. The feedback was always the same: interesting concept but unclear path to profitability. Niche market with limited scalability. Come back when you have more traction. I started to wonder if they were right. Maybe financial wellness for women was too narrow a focus. Maybe I should pivot to something broader, something more appealing to the venture capital firms who held the keys to growth. But every time I thought about changing direction, I remembered the women at Rosie's. I remembered Maria, who still did not know how much she needed to retire. I remembered Jasmine, who had started using Solace to save for her children's college funds. I remembered all the emails from users thanking me for creating something that finally made sense to them, that did not make them feel stupid for not understanding finance. Solace was not just an application, it was a mission, and missions were worth fighting for. The breakthrough came in the fall of 2020 during the pandemic. Everything was chaos. Restaurants were closing, jobs were disappearing, the economy was in free fall. But in that chaos, I saw an opportunity. Women were facing unprecedented job losses during the economic uncertainty. They were taking on more caregiving responsibilities. They were making impossible choices between paying rent and buying groceries. And they were desperate for tools that could help them navigate the crisis. I rewrote Solace's entire approach in 3 weeks, pivoting from long-term financial planning to immediate crisis management, emergency budgeting, unemployment benefit calculators, debt negotiation guides, community support for women who were struggling to survive. The new version spread like wildfire. Users doubled, then tripled, then grew exponentially. Women were sharing Solace on social media, recommending it to friends and family, writing testimonials about how the application had helped them survive the worst months of their lives. A small investment firm in Texas reached out. They specialized in women-led startups and had noticed our growth. After weeks of meetings and due diligence, they offered us $500,000 in seed funding. I quit my job at Rosie's the day the money hit our account. Maria hugged me and cried and told me she always knew I would do something special. Jasmine made me promise to come back and visit once I was rich and famous. I promised, meaning it completely. The investment allowed us to hire our first employees: 2 developers, a customer service representative, and a part-time accountant. We rented a small office space in a co-working building downtown, just one room with a window that looked out onto a parking garage. But it was ours. It was real. The growth continued through 2021 and into 2022. We raised a Series A round from a larger venture capital firm. We expanded our team to 20 people. We launched a premium subscription service that generated actual revenue. Forbes did a small feature on us as part of an article about pandemic-era startups led by women. Through it all, I thought about my family. Not often, but sometimes. Late at night when the office was empty and I was still working. Early in the morning before anyone else arrived. I wondered if they knew what I had built. I wondered if they cared. I had not contacted them. They had not contacted me. The silence between us stretched across years and miles, a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. Part of me wanted to call my father and tell him he had been wrong. I wanted to say that I did have direction, that I was building something real, that I was worth more than a $500 check and a dismissal at the dinner table. Part of me wanted to show up at their door in Vancouver with proof of my success, to force them to acknowledge me, to see me, to regret what they had done. But another part of me knew that would accomplish nothing. My father had not thrown me away because I was unsuccessful. He had thrown me away because I was not Brandon, and no amount of achievement would change that fundamental truth. So I kept building. I kept growing. I kept becoming someone my father could not ignore, even if I never showed him the evidence of my transformation. And then one morning in December of 2023, Forbes published their annual list of 30 founders under 30 who were changing the world. My name was on it. I found out about the Forbes list the way most news arrives these days, through my phone. I was in my apartment, which was now a proper one-bedroom, in a nice building with a doorman and walls that did not leak, drinking my morning coffee and scrolling through notifications before heading to the office. There was a message from Mia. Then another. Then 5 more. Then my phone started ringing with calls from numbers I did not recognize. The Forbes article was everywhere. 30 under 30, the women reshaping finance. And there I was, Harper Lewis founder and CEO of Solace, smiling from a professional photograph I had taken 3 months earlier, with a quote about building technology for women who had been overlooked by the traditional financial industry. The day became a blur of interviews and congratulations. Reporters called wanting statements. Investors reached out wanting meetings. Old acquaintances I had not spoken to in years suddenly remembered my existence. My inbox is filled with hundreds of messages, most from strangers offering praise, some from other founders asking for advice, a few from people trying to pitch me their own ideas. I handled it all with a calm I did not quite feel. I gave interviews. I accepted congratulations. I smiled for photographs. I said all the right things about being honored and grateful and excited for what came next. But underneath the professional exterior, I was thinking about Omaha. About a cold November evening 8 years earlier, about pot roast and ceramic fruit magnets, and the words that had sent me spiraling into a life I had never planned. Don't be home when we get back. That evening, after the chaos had died down and I was finally alone in my apartment, I sat on my couch and stared at my phone. I had turned off notifications hours ago, unable to keep up with the flood of messages. But there was one notification I could not ignore. A text from a number I still had saved in my contacts despite never using it. A number I had memorized before cell phones were common, had called 1,000 times growing up, had not dialed once in 8 years. The message was short. No pleasantries, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened since they told me to disappear. Christmas dinner. 6 p.m. We're back in Omaha. You need to be here. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. The words did not change, did not soften, did not reveal any hidden meaning or warmth. We're back in Omaha. After 8 years of silence, after cutting me out of their lives without a second thought, after not calling for my birthday, not checking in during the pandemic, not acknowledging my existence in any way. You need to be here. Not an invitation, a summons, as if I was still the disappointing daughter who could be ordered around, who would come running whenever they decided to remember her. I called Mia. She answered on the second ring, still buzzing from the day's excitement. "Can you believe the interview request?" she said. "I have 3 journalists wanting to do feature stories. And that venture fund from Boston, they want to set up a call tomorrow." I listened to her excitement for a moment, letting it wash over me. Then I told her about the text. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long. When Mia finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "What are you going to do?" I did not know. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it never arrived. Part of me wanted to respond with all the anger I had been suppressing for 8 years. Part of me, the part I was least proud of, still wanted my parents' approval, still craved their acknowledgement, still hoped that somehow after everything they might finally see me. "I need to go," I said finally. "I need to face them." Mia understood. She always understood. "Just remember who you are now," she said. "Remember what you built. Whatever they say, whatever happens, you earned this. They don't get to take that away." I went to bed that night thinking about Christmas dinner, about sitting across from the family who had discarded me, about my father's face when he saw the daughter he had written off, now a Forbes-featured entrepreneur worth millions on paper. What did he want? Money, acknowledgement. The chance to claim my success as something he had contributed to, I did not know, but I intended to find out. 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Omaha. My Tesla was staying in Denver, too conspicuous for the modest neighborhood where I had grown up. I rented a car at the airport instead, something nice but not flashy, and drove the familiar streets toward my childhood home. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The same beige siding, the same red door, the same winter bare trees in the front yard. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, and through the front window I could see the glow of more lights probably wrapped around the tree my mother would have decorated with the same ornaments she had used every year since I was born. For a long moment I sat in the rental car and stared at that house. 8 years. 8 years since I had walked out the door with 2 suitcases and nothing but a $500 check and a head full of rejection. I had returned as a completely different person. But as I got out of the car and walked up the path to the front door, I realized something important. They probably expected me to be the same. The daughter they remembered. The disappointment. The one who would show up because they told her to, who would be grateful for any scrap of attention they chose to throw her way. They were about to be very surprised. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood in the entrance wearing an apron over a nice dress, her hair grayer than I remembered, her face creased with lines that had deepened over the years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, separated by a threshold that felt like miles. "Harper," she said. Her voice cracked slightly on my name. You look wonderful." I waited for more, an apology, an explanation, something that acknowledged the chasm of silence between us. Instead, she stepped back and gestured me inside. Come in. Your father's in the living room. Brandon's helping him set up the projector for the photo slideshow." A photo slideshow at Christmas dinner after 8 years of nothing. I stepped inside, and immediately the smell of the house hit me. Pine needles and cinnamon, the same scented candles my mother had burned every December for as long as I could remember. Roasting turkey. Something sweet baking in the oven. The sense of childhood of holidays that had once meant warmth and belonging and family. Now they just made me feel sick. The living room was exactly as I remembered it. Same furniture, same arrangement, same family photos on the mantel. I scanned them quickly, looking for my face among the frames. There were pictures of Brandon at various ages. Brandon's graduation, Brandon's first apartment in Vancouver, Brandon with our parents in front of what looked like a Canadian mountain. No pictures of me, not a single one. Harper. My father emerged from behind the couch where he had been fiddling with cables. He was heavier than I remembered, his hair thinner, but he still carried himself with the same commanding presence that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning from my designer coat to my expensive shoes, taking inventory of everything that marked me as different from the girl who had left. "Well," he said finally, "look at you." It was not a compliment. It was an assessment, a calculation of my worth based on visible signs of success. Brandon appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, a glass of wine in his hand. He had aged, too. There were circles under his eyes and a softness around his middle that spoke of too many business lunches and not enough exercise. He looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to resentment. "Little sister," he said, "I saw the Forbes thing. Congratulations." The word came out flat obligatory, not genuine. Brandon had always hated when attention was directed at anyone but himself. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. We stood there in the living room of my childhood, 4 strangers connected by blood and nothing else. The awkwardness was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. "Well," my mother said too brightly, "dinner's almost ready. Harper, you can help me set the table." I followed her into the kitchen, grateful for something to do. The turkey was golden and perfect, surrounded by dishes of mashed potatoes and green beans and cranberry sauce. A pumpkin pie sat cooling on the counter. Everything looked exactly like the Christmas dinners of my memory, the ones from before Brandon moved to Vancouver, before I became the child they wanted to forget. "You've done so well," my mother said quietly, her back to me as she checked something in the oven. "We saw the articles, the news stories. Your father showed them to all his friends." I paused, a stack of plates in my hands. "He did." "Of course." She turned to face me, and I saw something complicated in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort. "We've always followed your career. Your father gets alerts on his phone whenever your name shows up in the news. 8 years of silence, and they had been watching the whole time, tracking my progress from a distance. Never reaching out, never congratulating me, never acknowledging that I existed as anything other than a news item. The anger I had been suppressing began to rise in my chest. Why, I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Why follow my career if you didn't want anything to do with me? Why not call? Why not send a single message in 8 years? My mother's face closed off the brief moment of openness, disappearing behind a mask of practiced composure. Your father thought it was best to give you space to find yourself. Space. As if being disowned was some kind of gift. As if being told not to be home when they returned was an act of parental wisdom. I opened my mouth to respond, but my father's voice interrupted from the doorway. "Let's not rehash ancient history," he said. "It's Christmas. We're together as a family. That's what matters now." I looked at him standing there, his arms crossed, his expression daring me to challenge him. For a moment, I was 22 again, sitting at that dinner table being told I was worthless while my brother ate his pot roast in silence. But I was not 22 anymore. I was 30, and I had built an empire while they were busy pretending I did not exist. "Fine," I said. "Let's eat." Dinner was an exercise in surrealism. We sat at the same table where my father had delivered his verdict 8 years ago, passing dishes of food and making small talk as if nothing had happened. My mother asked about my apartment in Denver. Brandon talked about his marketing company, though I noticed he avoided specifics. My father dominated the conversation with stories about his retirement plans and the golf trips he and Brandon had taken. No one mentioned the missing years. No one apologized. No one acknowledged the massive elephant sitting at the table wearing a party hat and waiting to be discussed. Finally, over dessert, my father cleared his throat in that familiar way that signaled he was about to say something important. "We need to talk about the family situation," he said. I set down my fork. "Here it comes," I thought. "Your brother's company has hit some challenges," my father continued. "The Canadian market wasn't as receptive as we'd hoped. He's had to close the Vancouver office and lay off most of his staff." I looked at Brandon, who was staring at his plate. The golden child struggling. The son they had invested everything in failing. "We've invested a significant portion of our retirement into Brandon's company," my mother added, her voice careful. We're in a difficult position financially." The pieces clicked into place. The sudden invitation, the Christmas dinner after 8 years of silence, the photo slideshow that was probably meant to remind me of happy family memories. They were broke, and they wanted me to bail them out. My father leaned forward, his businessman's instinct kicking in. "Now that you've had some success," he said, "we think it's time for the family to come together, support each other. Brandon has some exciting new ideas that could really take off with the right investment." I remained at the table studying the three of them. My father still trying to be in charge. My mother silent and complicit. My brother, who had received everything while I received nothing, now looks at me with barely concealed desperation. 8 years, I said finally. "You threw me away 8 years ago. You told me not to be home. You cut me out of family events, family photos, family everything. You never called, never wrote, never acknowledged that I existed." I stood up from the table, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "And now that you need money, suddenly we're family again." My father's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute," he started. "No," I said. "You wait. You've been waiting for 8 years apparently. Following my career, tracking my success, never once reaching out to congratulate me or tell me you were proud. Now you want me to invest in Brandon's failing company to rescue you from the consequences of your own decisions." I picked up my coat from the chair where I had left it. "I did not come here for your approval anymore," I said. "I do not need it. I built Solace without your help, without your support, without even your acknowledgement. I did it alone the way you wanted me to." I walked toward the front door, and then I paused. There was something else I needed to say, something I had been carrying for 8 years. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, turning to face them one last time. "It is not that you chose Brandon over me. It is that you made me believe I deserved to be unchosen, that I was worth less, that I did not matter. But I do matter. I built something that helps hundreds of thousands of women. Women who were told they did not matter either. Women who were written off and overlooked and treated like they were less than. I matter, and I do not need your text message or your Christmas dinner or your desperate request for money to prove it. I opened the door to the cold Nebraska night. Goodbye, I said, and then I walked out. I drove to a hotel instead of going back to my rental car. The Omaha Marriott, a nice place downtown where no one knew my name or my history. I checked in with a card linked to my company account and went up to my room and stood at the window looking out at the city lights. My hands were still shaking. The confrontation had gone differently than I had imagined, though I was not sure what I had expected. An apology, a moment of recognition. My father admitting that he had been wrong. Instead, I walked out, again. Only this time, I had chosen to leave. The next morning, I woke to a knock at my door. Housekeeping, I assumed, and was about to say I did not need anything when I heard a familiar voice. "Harper, it's Mrs. Collins, from next door. Your mother told me you were staying here." Mrs. Collins, the elderly woman who had lived next to my childhood home for as long as I could remember. She used to give me cookies when I was little and had always asked about my life with genuine interest. I opened the door. Mrs. Collins stood there in her winter coat, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked older, but still sharp-eyed, still kind. "May I come in?" she asked. "There's something you should know." We sat at the small table by the window, and Mrs. Collins told me things that made my blood run cold. After I had left Omaha, my parents had crafted a story. They told everyone in the neighborhood that I had run off with a boyfriend, that I had abandoned the family, that I was ungrateful and selfish and impossible to live with. They said I had demanded money and left when they refused. They said I had cut off contact, not them. For 8 years they had painted me as the villain of our family story. "Your father was quite convincing," Mrs. Collins said, her voice sad. "He showed everyone the check he had given you as a graduation gift, said you took it and disappeared, made it sound like you were troubled, difficult. A lot of people believed him. I sat there processing this new information. All those years I had thought my family simply did not care about me. It was worse than that. They had actively destroyed my reputation, told lies to justify their own choices, and made sure that anyone who might have been sympathetic to me would see me as the problem." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Mrs. Collins reached across the table and took my hand. "Because I never believed it," she said. "I watched you grow up, Harper. I knew you were a good girl. When I saw you on the news building that company helping all those women, I knew the truth had to be different from what your parents said." She squeezed my hand. "And because I think you deserve to know what you're dealing with, what your father is capable of saying to protect his own image." After she left, I sat in that hotel room for a long time. The lies explained so much. Why old family friends never reached out. Why my parents' version of events never seemed to include the detail that they had told me not to be home. Why they felt comfortable summoning me to Christmas dinner after 8 years, as if I was the one who had something to prove. They had rewritten history, and everyone had believed them. That night, I called Mia and told her everything. About the dinner, the financial ask, the confrontation, and now the lies. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I do not know yet," I said. "But I am done being the villain of their story." The next few days I stayed in Omaha. I visited old neighbors. I had coffee with former teachers who remembered me. I ran into people at the grocery store, the library, the coffee shops of my youth, and to each of them I simply told the truth. I did not accuse my parents of lying. I did not call them out or demand apologies on their behalf. I just told my version of events calmly and clearly. The dinner where I was told to leave, the 8 years of silence, the sudden invitation after Forbes, the request for money. People listened. Some were skeptical at first, but the more I talked, the more the inconsistencies in my father's version became apparent. Why would a daughter who had supposedly abandoned her family build a company dedicated to helping women? Why would someone who had demanded money and run away return for Christmas dinner with nothing to gain? The truth has a weight to it that lies cannot replicate. And slowly the narrative began to shift. On my last night in Omaha, my phone rang. It was my father. "I know what you've been doing," he said. His voice was tight with anger. "Talking to people, spreading your version. You're trying to make us look bad." "I am telling the truth," I said. "That is all. You need to stop," he said. "You need to think about your mother. "This is hard on her. Then she should have said something 8 years ago," I said. "Instead of watching you tell me I was worthless." There was silence on the other end. Then, more quietly than I had ever heard him speak, my father said something that surprised me. "We made mistakes. It was not an apology. It was barely even an acknowledgement." But it was more than I had ever heard from him. "Yes," I said. "You did." I hung up without saying goodbye. There was nothing else to say. The next morning, I flew back to Denver, to my life, to my company, to the future I had built without them. But I knew this was not over. There were still things to resolve, wounds that needed healing, decisions to be made about what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with the family who had thrown me away. The reckoning was just beginning. I returned to Denver, but Omaha lingered in my mind like a persistent headache. The conversations I had with neighbors and old acquaintances had planted seeds, but Mrs. Collins' revelation haunted me most of all. My parents had not just abandoned me, they had assassinated my character to everyone who might have cared. 2 weeks after my return, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual paper letter with a Nebraska postmark. It was from Mrs. Collins. Inside was a handwritten note and a collection of newspaper clippings she had saved over the years. The clippings documented various milestones in my parents' social life. Richard Lewis honored at insurance company Gala. The Lewis family donates to local charity. Brandon Lewis launches a successful marketing venture in Vancouver. The note explained what the clippings did not show. "Dear Harper," she wrote, "I kept these because something always bothered me about them. Your father made sure to mention you in every interview for the first 2 years after you left. Always the same story, the troubled daughter, the one who disappeared. I remember reading them and thinking how strange it was that a girl I remembered as kind and hardworking could turn out the way he described. Then I saw your name in a business article 3 years ago. You were doing something with financial planning for women. I started following your story and began to understand the truth. Your father stopped mentioning you in interviews around that time. I think he knew people might start connecting the dots." Mrs. Collins had included one more thing in the envelope, a photocopy of a guest book from a block party 7 years ago. My father had written in the comments section expressing regret that their family celebration was smaller that year due to their daughter's choices. 7 years ago, just 1 year after they had told me not to be home. He was still telling the story, still building the narrative, still making sure everyone knew that if there was a problem in the Lewis family, it was me. I called Mia and read her the letter. They were thorough, she said, anger evident in her voice. They covered their tracks, made sure no one would question their version. But why, I asked, why go to such lengths? They threw me out. They got what they wanted. Why keep talking about me? Mia was quiet for a moment. "Because it makes them look better," she said finally. "A daughter who left on her own, who was troubled and difficult, that makes them the victims. But a daughter they threw away for not being good enough, that makes them villains. Your father needed a version of the story where he was still the good guy." She was right. Of course she was right. My father had always been obsessed with image, with perception, with making sure the world saw him as successful and competent and in control. A daughter who had been rejected would undermine that image. A daughter who had rejected them was a different matter entirely. The anger I felt was cold and precise, not the hot, reactive anger of my confrontation at Christmas dinner. This was something else, something calculated. I had spent 8 years building solace, building a company that helped women reclaim their financial lives. Now it was time to reclaim my own story. I started with a phone call to a journalist I had met during the Forbes coverage. She worked for a national magazine and had expressed interest in doing a longer feature about my background. At the time, I had declined, uncomfortable with the attention and unwilling to share my family history with the public. Now I was ready. The interview took place over 3 days. I told her everything. The dinner where I was told to leave, the $500 check, the 8 years of silence, the Christmas summons, the lies my father had told to neighbors and colleagues, Mrs. Collins' letter, and the newspaper clippings documenting his campaign to rewrite our family history. The journalist recorded everything, asked probing questions, verified details with sources. She contacted Mrs. Collins and other Omaha residents who were willing to speak. She even reached out to my parents for comment. My father declined to participate. My mother sent a brief statement through an attorney saying that family matters should remain private. The article was published 3 months later, titled, "The Daughter Who Disappeared: How Harper Lewis Built an Empire After Being Disowned." It was thoroughfare and devastating, not because it sensationalized our family drama, but because it simply told the truth. The response was overwhelming. Solace saw a surge in new users, many of them women who had experienced similar family rejection. I received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of being discarded by parents, of being told they were not good enough, of building lives from the ashes of abandonment. I also received messages from people in Omaha. Former neighbors, old classmates, people who had believed my father's version for years. Some apologized for not reaching out. Some admitted they had suspected the truth, but had not wanted to get involved. Some simply said they were glad to know what had really happened. The truth, it turned out, had a way of setting things right. My father called me once 2 days after the article was published. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief and cold. "I hope you're happy," he said. "You've destroyed this family." I saved the message, not because I wanted to listen to it again, but because I wanted a record of his response. Typical. No reflection, no accountability, no acknowledgement that his own choices had led to this moment, just blame directed at me for telling the truth. I did not call him back. In the weeks that followed, the narrative around my family shifted permanently. The old story, the one my father had carefully constructed, crumbled in the face of documented evidence and independent verification. People who had once accepted his version now questioned everything he had told them. It was not revenge, exactly. I had not set out to humiliate my father or destroy his reputation. I had simply refused to let his lies stand unchallenged. I had told the truth and let the chips fall where they may. But watching his carefully constructed image collapse, watching the world finally see the man behind the facade, I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in it. The following December, a year after my confrontation in Omaha, I found myself preparing for the holidays in a very different way. Solace had grown beyond anything I had imagined, serving over 2 million users and expanding into financial literacy programs for high schools and community colleges. Mia and I had been profiled in major publications, invited to speak at conferences recognized as leaders in the fintech industry. On the surface, everything was perfect. But inside, I was still processing, still healing, still trying to understand what it meant to build a life after being rejected by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone in my Denver apartment, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The city sparkled with holiday lights outside my window. Families visible through other apartment windows gathered around trees and tables. Normal people doing normal holiday things. I had received invitations to parties, to dinners, to gatherings hosted by colleagues and friends. Mia had asked me to join her family celebration in San Francisco, but I had declined them all, choosing instead to spend the holiday alone. I needed time. Time to think, time to feel, time to sit with the complicated emotions that the past year had stirred up. My phone sat on the coffee table silent. I had half expected my father to reach out again, to make some last-ditch attempt at reconciliation now that a full year had passed. But there was nothing. No text, no call, no sudden appearance at my door. The silence should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like confirmation. They had never wanted me, not really. The Christmas invitation the year before had been about money, about desperation, not about family. And now that I had refused to play my assigned role, they had gone back to pretending I did not exist. I wondered about Brandon. In the years since the article was published, he had disappeared from public view. His LinkedIn profile still listed him as a marketing consultant, but there were no recent updates, no signs of new ventures. I hoped he had found peace somewhere, though I doubted it. People raised to believe they were golden, rarely adjusted well when reality proved otherwise. I wondered about my mother. Mrs. Collins had mentioned in a recent letter that she seemed thinner, quieter, rarely seen outside the house. The aftermath of the article had been hard on her, apparently. Part of me felt bad about that. My mother had never been the driving force behind my rejection. She had just failed to intervene, failed to protect me, failed to be the mother I needed. But another part of me knew that silence was a choice. Complicity was a choice. She could have said something, done something, been something other than my father's echo. She had not. I finished my tea and went to bed early. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, and I had decided to spend it volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. It seemed like a better use of the holiday than sitting alone with my thoughts, and it aligned with the mission that had defined my life for the past several years. That night, I dreamed about Omaha, about the house with the red door and the Christmas lights, about sitting at the dinner table while snow fell outside the window, about my father's voice telling me not to be home when they returned. In the dream, I was 22 again, small and scared and desperate for approval. But then something shifted. Dream me stood up from the table, looked my father in the eye, and said something I had never said in real life. I am going to be someone, and one day you will wish you had believed in me. I woke up with tears on my pillow and a strange sense of peace. The dream was not a prophecy. It was a reminder of who I had been and who I had become. The little girl at that dinner table, the one who had been thrown away, she was still part of me. She would always be part of me. But she was no longer running the show. She was no longer desperately seeking approval from people who would never give it. I got up, showered, dressed, and headed downtown to the shelter. It was Christmas morning and I had work to do. The following spring brought an unexpected invitation. Solace had been nominated for a major technology award, and the ceremony was being held in Chicago. I was asked to attend and give a speech if we won. We won. Standing at that podium looking out at an audience of tech executives and investors and journalists, I felt a strange mix of triumph and grief. I had achieved something remarkable. I had built a company from nothing, helped millions of women take control of their financial lives, proven that the girl who had been thrown away could become someone who mattered. But my parents were not there to see it. They had never seen any of it. After the ceremony during the reception, I found myself in conversation with a venture capitalist from New York. We were discussing potential expansion opportunities when I noticed a familiar face across the room. My father. He was standing near the bar holding a glass of what looked like whiskey, watching me. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive, but slightly dated the kind of thing a successful insurance executive might have worn a decade ago. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, as if the past year had shrunk him. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he started walking toward me. The venture capitalist noticed my expression and politely excused himself, leaving me alone as my father approached. "Harper," he said. His voice was different than I remembered, softer, uncertain. "Dad," I replied. We stood there in the middle of the reception, surrounded by people who had no idea about the history between us, the years of silence, the lies, the rejection. "You were good up there," he said. "Your speech. It was impressive. Thank you." Another long pause. My father shifted his weight, looked at his drink, looked back at me. "I made mistakes," he said finally. The same words he had said on the phone, but this time they sounded different, more real, more painful. I waited. "I was wrong about you," he continued. I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought Brandon was the answer. I thought you needed to learn to survive on your own. I told myself it was for your benefit, but it was not. It was for me. I was embarrassed by things I did not understand, and I pushed you away instead of trying to learn. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. I had never heard my father's voice crack before. "Mrs. Collins told me about her letter," he said. "She told me what she wrote, what she remembered. I didn't realize how my words had spread, how my version of events had become the only version. I was protecting myself, and I didn't see the damage it was doing. I stood very still, processing his words. This was not the confrontation I had imagined. This was something else entirely, something unexpected. "Why are you here, Dad?" He took a breath. Because I had to see for myself what you built, who you became. I had to understand what I threw away. He set his drink down on a nearby table. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I know I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. I see what you are. For a moment, I was speechless. This was everything I had wanted to hear for 8 years. Validation from the man who had told me I was nothing. Acknowledgement from the father who had deemed me unworthy of his investment. But standing there hearing his words, I realized something surprising. I did not need it anymore. Thank you for coming, I said. I mean that. It took courage to be here tonight. He nodded, his eyes wet. I should probably go, he said. Let me get back to your celebration. I watched him walk away, this man who had shaped so much of my life through his absence, his rejection, his eventual recognition. At the door, he turned back one more time. I'm proud of you, Harper, for whatever that's worth now. And then he was gone. I stood in the middle of that reception for several minutes, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. The wounds were too deep for that, at least not yet. But something close to peace. A sense that a chapter was finally closing. My father had seen me. Really see me. And while his opinion no longer determined my worth, there was something valuable in his acknowledgement. Something that allowed me to finally put down the weight I had been carrying since I was 22 years old. The girl at the dinner table had been seen. She could rest now. After the Chicago ceremony, I flew back to Denver and drove to my favorite spot in the city, a small park overlooking the mountains where I often went to think. It was late evening, and snow was beginning to fall, soft flakes drifting down through the glow of the streetlights. I sat in my car and watched the snow, remembering another snowy evening 8 years ago. The night I had left Omaha with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. The night my life as I knew it had ended and a new life uncertain and terrifying had begun. So much has changed since then. I had built a company. I had found my purpose. I had created something that mattered, that helped people, that would outlast me. And I had finally confronted the pain that had driven me to build it in the first place. I called Mia. She answered on the second ring, as she always did. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I saw the photos from the ceremony. You looked amazing. Thanks." I took a breath. My dad was there. Silence. Then quietly, what happened? I told her everything. The conversation, the apology, the acknowledgement. The way he had said he was proud of me, and how those words had felt both meaningful and insufficient at the same time. Mia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that cut straight to the heart of it. "You've been carrying him around for 8 years, she said. "His voice in your head telling you that you weren't good enough. Is he still there?" I thought about it. I really thought about it. "He's quieter," I said finally. "He's not gone completely. Maybe he never will be. But he's quieter. That's healing," Mia said. "That's what healing looks like. Not erasure, but volume control." I laughed, the first genuine laugh I had felt in days. Volume control. I like that. We talked for another hour about the company, about expansion plans, about a new initiative I wanted to launch. A scholarship program for women who had been rejected by their families. Women who had been told they were not good enough, who had been thrown away, who needed someone to believe in them. "I want to call it the Second Chance Foundation," I said, "because everyone deserves a second chance at having someone believe in them." "I love it," Mia said. "When do we start tomorrow?" I said. "Tonight, I'm going to sit here and watch the snow." After I hung up, I stayed in my car for a long time. The snow fell harder, blanketing the park in white, covering everything in a layer of clean possibility. I thought about the journey I had taken, from Omaha to Denver, from waitress to founder, from rejected daughter to Forbes featured entrepreneur, from wounded girl to healing woman. It has not been easy. There were still hard days, still moments when the old voices came back, still wounds that needed tending. But I made it. I had built something real from something devastating. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to simply feel proud. Not proud because my father had finally said it. Not proud because Forbes had validated me. Proud because I knew in my bones what I had accomplished, what I had survived, who I had become. I smiled. Sitting in my car watching the snow fall over Denver, I smiled. It was a small thing, that smile, just a movement of muscles, a physical expression of emotion. But it was the first time in 8 years that I had smiled without a trace of sadness underneath. The past would always be part of me. The rejection, the lies, the years of silence. But the past no longer defined me. I had written a new story, built a new life, become a new person. And that person, the one smiling in the snow, was finally at peace. It has been a year since my father approached me at that ceremony in Chicago. A year since I sat in my car and smiled as the snow fell over Denver. A year of continued growth, continued healing, continued becoming. Solace now serves over 3 million users. We have expanded into educational programs, community initiatives, and partnerships with companies that share our mission. The Second Chance Foundation has awarded scholarships to 200 women in its first year, women who remind me of myself at 22, scared and determined, and refusing to give up. I am 31 years old. I live in a house I own outright, a modest place with a garden and a room I use for painting a hobby I picked up last year. I have friends who feel like family colleagues, who feel like partners, a life that feels genuinely mine. I have not spoken to my parents since Chicago. My father sends occasional emails, brief messages about weather or holidays, nothing substantial. I read them but do not respond. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe it will not. Either way, I have made peace with the uncertainty. Brandon reached out once through LinkedIn, of all places. His message was short. "I'm sorry for everything." That was all. I wrote back and said I accepted his apology, and I meant it. We are not close, probably never will be, but the anger I once felt toward him has faded. He was a product of the same dysfunction I was, just affected in different ways. My mother sent me a birthday card this year. Inside, she had written a simple message. I should have said something. I'm sorry I didn't. It was not enough, but it was something. A crack in the silence, a possibility of something more. Healing is not linear. There are still days when the old wounds ache, when I wake up feeling like that 22-year-old girl being told she was not worth investing in. But those days are fewer now, and when they come, I know how to handle them. I reach out to Mia, to friends, to the community of women who understand what it means to be undervalued and to rebuild anyway. I think often about what my story means for others. The messages I receive from Solace users, from scholarship recipients, from women who saw my interviews or read the articles about my family. So many of them have similar stories. Daughters who were passed over, wives who were dismissed, workers who were overlooked, human beings who were told in ways large and small that they did not matter. To all of them, to all of you, I want to say this: you matter. Not because someone else says so, not because you achieve something impressive, not because you prove your doubters wrong. You matter simply because you exist, because you are trying, because you wake up every day and face a world that sometimes feels designed to defeat you. The people who dismissed you, who hurt you, who told you that you were not enough, their opinions are not facts. Their words are not destiny. They saw you through the lens of their own limitations, their own fears, their own inadequacies. They were wrong about you. You get to write your own story. You get to define your own worth. You get to build a life that reflects who you actually are, not who others expected you to be. It will not be easy. There will be moments when you want to give up, when the voices in your head are louder than the truth in your heart. But you can do it. I know, because I did it. I know because millions of women do it every single day. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are not worthless. You are worthy. If you have ever felt like I did at 22, standing in the snow outside my childhood home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a devastating rejection, I want you to know that there is a path forward. It may not look like mine. It may not lead to Forbes or founder status or public recognition, but it will be yours, authentic and real and infinitely valuable. Find your people. Find your purpose. Find the thing that makes you come alive and pursue it with everything you have. The world needs what you have to offer, even if the people closest to you could not see it, especially if they could not see it. My father told me I had no direction. He was wrong. I just had not found it yet. My mother stayed silent when I needed her voice, but I found other voices, other mothers in spirit, if not in blood. What they took from me, I rebuilt on my own terms. If you are reading this, If my story resonates with you, I have one request. Leave a comment. Share your own story. Tell me and everyone else who reads this that you are standing up, that you are moving forward, that you refuse to let the people who rejected you determine who you become. Write the words, "I am worthy." Mean them. And then go build the life you deserve. The world is